very in the moment where he's just like, I have Kieran friends,
Oh yeah.
and it's like, oh,
That,
really?
oh my God, that just reminded me of like, sure I have Kyrian friends, but would I want my daughter marrying one? No. Like
Right?
that was
Right.
the second part of that statement that wasn't said, but
Hmm.
that
Mhm.
we've all heard a million times.
Right, exactly. And it's just like, what the heck? Um, and Corin's like, well, guess what? We found an artifact, and it's gonna let you know that we're right, and we're gonna even hear from the people on Voyager because it's surely got all of their logs and stuff on it. And um, I wrote basically he found an external hard drive, so he thinks. Um, and then, but by this time, all the other guests are looking at them, and Corin's like, "Go on, go about your business, go," kind of thing. Um, so later on, don't know when it is. Could be any time. I have a feeling Corin lives at the museum. Uh,
He
we
seems
see.
to.
He seems obsessive about his museum.
Oh yes. He goes into the simulation. He has it set up as the engine room. He's fiddling around with this artifact. It turns out it's actually the MH backup. So the doctor appears as a hologram and is like, "What is your medical emergency? Where the heck? Why am I?" Kind of thing. And then he realizes this guy it is a Kyrian, and he's just like, "Oh, security, Um, and I didn't write this down, but I kept thinking every time I saw the Kyrians, they have this like little thing at the bridge of their nose, like, something to denote that they're alien, but it looks like two like whitehead zits about to pop, or there's pus starting to come out of them. Like it's disgusting. I couldn't handle it. Uh,
It's not my favorite alien design.
no, no, no. I'm sorry, whoever worked on like the visual, like the makeup effects, but it was just weird. I didn't care for it. Um, you did a good job making it gross, even though you didn't
Yeah,
want it to be gross, I'm sure.
for real. It's not. Yeah, it's not the best.
um, so the doctor appears, right? And he is surprised that he's there. And Quarren's telling him, you're not, this is all simulation, none of that's real. You're not going to get anybody to answer your call. And so then the doctor's like, what kind of thing. And Quarren is the same way, except for that the doctor is a hologram. He's like, you're a hologram. You're a hologram. Like he keeps repeating it because he's he's so surprised. And he lets the doctor know that it's been 700 years. He doesn't know what happened to anybody from Voyager. The doctor doesn't really believe him, which I thought was kind of like, this was kind of crazy because it's like the doctor doesn't believe him, and then he sort of, no, and then runs off. It's like, that seemed like a little much, but he winds up
What?
in another room in the museum.
I just think how devastating it would be for the doctor. Like,
Yeah.
it's like he went to
Yeah.
sleep, and then when he woke up, he's supposedly 700 years later. Like, of
That's
course it's not.
true.
You know?
He actually has like feelings and stuff for a hologram. That's true.
Oh yeah, and like that's what I love about the Doctor at this point. Like he's programmed himself to be much more human
Mhm.
than your typical hologram.
There was um, one where somebody was stealing stuff off of ships, and Da Vinci was in it and all this stuff, and Leonardo da Vinci had his little thing so that the doctor could go around the ship and stuff, and And so now like he was wearing it or whatever, and the doctor's like, I can't leave sick bay, and so he's like trying to get. I love this bit because he was trying to get Seven to give him like gossip and stuff and tell him what was going on.
Oh yeah.
And she's just like, everything is normal. Yeah, there was an altercation, because her and Torres got in a fight. It's like great. And he just wants to know every little tidbit. He's like, come back if you want to talk.
That is a great scene. And yeah, once he got that mobile emitter, he could go anywhere on the ship. He could go on away missions, and he loved that thing because it really it was allowed him to physically leave sick bay. And then he, as Nicola mentioned, he had expanded his programming, and he was so much more than just the original hologram that he when we first met him. So
Well,
yeah, great stuff.
One of the very first things he says when he like wakes up these 700 years later is like, "Where is my mobile emitter?" Like,
oh right,
yeah, exactly.
It's a part of him. It's really like it's who he is, and without it, like there's this sense of loss.
For sure. But it made him feel more like one of the crew because, of course anybody on the crew could just walk wherever they want, but not the doctor. The doctor was confined to sickbay because that's where the holographic emitters were. But now with this thing, it's almost like he was just like, one of the gang. He could just walk around anywhere, and it made him even more a part of the crew.
Okay. I haven't watched enough of it, so I just sort of jumped in, and I'm like, he's got a lot of thoughts and feelings and stuff for a hologram. For not a real person. I'm so confused.
Yeah.
But
No,
that helps.
it's one of the things I think is one of the really greatest parts of Voyager is watching the Doctor. It's almost like watching Data try to become more human in Next Generation. Where you're watching this hologram try to be more than just a program, more than just a computer program with subroutines, and and he does it in his own unique way. Whereas, Brent Spiner did it in his own unique way when he was Data. And definitely I think Robert-Picardo plays it extremely sarcastic, which is, it just fits the character so well.
Yeah, I like him more than I expected to.
Oh, that's awesome.
He's definitely probably my favorite, one of my favorite characters on the show, and just you would think that he would be too similar to Data in his journey to be from artificial to human, and it's just such a unique way of going about this transition to being the Doctor.
And without him, we wouldn't have 17 Rioses.
This is true.
It's very true.
All with different accents.
Yes. That's very true.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So we go back to the Doctor looking at this museum and being freaked out, and he's like, I want to contact Starfleet if there's still such a thing. I need, all these things are going through his head. He's trying to figure out what to do. And he's like, what are you going to do with me? Am I going to be on display? And compares himself to like Rip Van Winkle and stuff. And Quarren is like, you're a war criminal. So you're going to have to be like tried for all of these things that you did. It's like, what?
Well, doesn't he tell him that he says that on his world holograms are considered sentient life, and I'm like, well, that's convenient. Like,
well, it's 700 years in the future, so I guess they all are now,
right?
All because of him. Well, and like he had to Quarren. The Doctor is the one that created this biological weapon and killed all these people. Like, because he's a mass murderer. And poor Doctor is just like, no, I just want to help people. So, that's kind of sad, but he wants to see what their version of events are. So, the next scene we see the
Well, I want
crew.
to go back to that
Oh,
the
yes.
scene real quick because, like, there's that moment where he's like, this isn't what happened. This isn't. There's that they show the ship in the background, and he's like, that's not what my ship looks like. And
Yeah, because it had tons of
torpedoes, and it's like
and
an
things,
armored hull. And Corn's like, well, we found a partial schematic that was damaged, so like we could have gotten some things wrong. And I think it was during that moment where like it just plays into how we look at things in history and we think we know what happened, but we're only getting fragments of our past.
Yeah.
And we just, Corin says later on, like, well, we extrapolated based on what we know. And that's all history is we're just extrapolating based on what we know. And we know a lot, but there's a lot of things we don't, and we get a lot of things wrong.
Well, yeah, like there's, when it comes to all kinds of things, like with revisionist history and all, about slavery and stuff, and things that people get wrong about how someone being like transgender or something might have been viewed in other cultures or other times, and that some things are more relatively new about gender and all that kind of stuff too. It's like we can't pretend to know everything just from one little bit of stuff.
Well, I think it's also true of of how you look at things. So one example would be, and I had heard this ages and ages ago when I was still in school, was that, if you go back into, let's say, American history books, right, and we learn about a figure in the Revolutionary War, Benedict Arnold, right? In American history, he's a traitor, he's terrible, he collaborated with the British, and so on and so forth. But if you were to go on the British side, would they view Benedict Arnold as a traitor, or would he be viewed as some heroic patriot who was trying to keep the colonies together for the glory of England? Like, it's how you look at things, because the fact is there of what happened, but it's how you look at it from your point of view.
And not just that, but like, who's teaching us the information? I think a lot about, like, in school learning about the civil rights movement, and it was like, well, Martin Luther King Jr., he was the good guy. He was the pacifist. Malcolm X was the bad guy because he was angry. And like, that was the history I was taught. And then it wasn't until like way later when I was actually teaching Malcolm X, and like my mind was so blown because it's like, how was I allowed to learn this when this is so far from the reality? And it's, this is the story people want you to believe because it's convenient. And, in this episode, there are so many things that they've extrapolated because it's convenient for them to tell their history this way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really great example.
So yes, I really did. I don't want it to seem like I didn't like that. Like, that was a very good way of putting it. But back to the show, unfortunately. Back to our science fiction show after all our serious talk. But yeah, there will be more.
Yeah, we're done with politics talk now. This is science fiction.
Oh, yes, of course. Back to Star Trek. No.
Which is not political at all, ever, as we all know.
There's no politics in space battles.
Listen,
nope.
Sometimes it's not political because the death of, people, like genocide, that shouldn't be political, or people going hungry. Anyway, some themes should not be political, but that's just my soapbox. I'm going to get off. Well, I'm going to get off one soapbox. I need the other one to be able to see over the counter. So, um, um, so we go back to the simulation. We see the